Welcome to the presentation of Multimedia, Multimodal Learning, and Multicultural Studies, beginning with the ancient world. The literary traditions, the art, literature, music, philosophy, religion, science, theater, and drama of the ancient world as context for the accelerated acquisition and retention of knowledge through a multi-layer presentation of orchestrated audio-visual events. The video that you're seeing at the moment on screen is an overview of the origins of the Trojan War. But this is not only a study of war, it is a study of divinity and its relationship to humanity. Highlighted in the major literature of the ancient world, Ovid's Metamorphoses, Virgil's Aeneid, Homer's Iliad, and the Odyssey. All of these works are the vehicles by which we know about the ancient Greek mythology. The significance of these for us is that they outline the relationship between divinity and humanity. Because, as this video shows, it is the relationship between humanity and divinity that is at the basis of the Trojan War. I've also chosen period music reconstructed by Greek ethnomusicologists, taken from representations on the Greek ceramic pottery of musical instruments, our knowledge of the Greek musical system, and our knowledge of its usages in ceremonial environments. So what I'd like you to do in this, you don't necessarily have to read the inscriptions and the slides that describe this, but just let these images flow over you to get a sense of what the greatest artists in world cultural history have done to represent these stories. And in the process, get a sense of what the origins of this major conflict in the ancient world were. The conflict was that the three goddesses, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, appeared to Paris, one of the Trojan princes, and said, "You have to decide which one of us is the most beautiful." And Paris, of course, he was sleeping in a cave at the time. He woke up, he sees this apparition, and he thinks about this. Each goddess offers him something, and he eventually chooses Aphrodite as the most beautiful goddess. And she tells him at the time, "I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad you chose me, but you must understand that your decision comes with consequences. That it will result in the loss of a kingdom. It will also result in the anger of the other two goddesses that you didn't choose." And in fact, that's exactly what happens. The gods Apollo and Neptune support and defend Troy. Athena and others oppose Troy, and it basically causes a war, a disagreement among the gods that filters down into humanity. Well, those stories are in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And in fact, the word metamorphoses means the story of transformation, the story of the effect of divine contact in human life, and the changes that take place as a result of that. The Trojan War is an example of those transformations. One of the feature characters, Ballad of Troy, taken from Sparta by Paris against the will of her husband, King Menelaus. And this begins one of the more obvious reasons of the Trojan War, but the underlying reason was King Agamemnon's greed, power, ambition to take over the Aegean Sea and its commercial environments. And that became the driving influence for his attack on Troy, which took the form of 1,000 ships, 100,000 warriors, and 10 years of ongoing battle. The representations of this conflict are evident everywhere in Greek literature and art. This sculptural work by a 19th century French sculptor named Varenne is the moment at which the arrow hits Achilles' heel. You know, the story of Achilles' heel, the only vulnerable spot on his body. The great Greek warrior, the end of the film Troy, Paris draws back his arrow and fires and hits the vulnerable spot. And this is the moment captured in a sculptural piece in which Achilles, the life begins to drain from his body. The Iliad, ancient Greek epic poem created in the 8th century, but popularized and amplified in the Greek Golden Age, primarily because of the Greek heroic code content. What's the Greek heroic code? It's the idea of individuality, our ability to achieve, our ability to set individual and cultural goals and improve ourselves and prepare a place for ourselves in the afterlife to celebrate our own accomplishments. Well, if you combine that with the Protestant capitalist work ethic and mix it in with the Greek heroic code, which was the point of departure for the humanistic tradition in Western civilization, you get an industrial technological revolution that is ongoing in America and Europe to this day. So if we think that these concepts are remote, ancient, and irrelevant to us standing here in the 21st century, we should think again. Because that layer, that undercurrent of cultural influence is still very much alive. Beethoven's The Ruins of Athens, an appropriate transition to our first video that talks about the significance of the Greek Golden Age, and why it is that we still celebrate it, and why it is that our visual arts and architectural traditions still make use of its basic principles and natural laws of construction.
People glorious and arrogant, valiant and headstrong. These were the men and women who laid the very foundations of Western civilization. Their monuments still recall perhaps the most extraordinary 2 centuries in history. A time which saw the birth of science and politics, philosophy, literature and drama. Which saw the creation of art and architecture. We still strive to equal. Themistocles never recovered from this humiliation. He was found a man who seemed the perfect reflection of this new ideal. A man who would change the face of Athens forever. A man named Pericles.
It's probably not a more important figure in the history of classical Greece than Pericles. He was the leader of Athens at the height of its power and of its artistic achievement. He was the figure associated appropriately with bringing Athenian democracy to its climax, to its height.
But Pericles was no obvious democrat like Themistocles, for he had been born into one of Athens' most elite families. And perhaps because of his aristocratic origins, Pericles knew what the people of Athens now wanted. a city fit to rule an empire.
It seems clear that Pericles had in mind to create a city whose greatness would be admired by the people who lived there, by everybody else in the Greek world, well into the future.
Pericles announced a glorious new vision to the Athenian assembly.
All kinds of enterprises should be created which will provide inspiration for every art, find employment for every hand. We must devote ourselves to acquiring things that will be the source of everlasting fame.
Pericles turned his attention to the Acropolis, the sheer peak in the center of Athens, home of the city's patron goddess, Athena. "20 years earlier, the Persians had burnt down the temples that stood here. Ever since, the Athenians had left these ruins untouched, as a memorial to those killed in the war. But Pericles had other ideas. He proposed a massive reconstruction plan. At its center would be a new Parthenon, a temple to Athena, and it would be one of the most astonishing buildings of the ancient world.
This new construction program was of unprecedented magnitude and expense. The Parthenon in particular was extraordinarily expensive. It was filled with all sorts of architectural refinements.
Pericles planned to spend over 5,000 talents in the first year alone. A total budget of more than $1 billion in today's terms. This project would require 20,000 tons of marble. The Athenian quarries at Mount Pentelicus, just outside the city, resounded as hundreds of workmen traced out and carved great blocks of marble from the mountain.
Bear in mind that the Parthenon becomes the condensation of Greek cultural consciousness in stone.
Sculptors and craftsmen were gathered from all over the Greek world. With them stood Pericles, for he treated the building of the Parthenon as his own personal project.
He selected architects, he selected the men who designed the plans. Pericles was directly involved in the planning process.
Some protested that he was decking out the city like a prostitute. But when the building was completed in only 15 years, his critics were silenced.
It also becomes a symbol of the humanistic tradition for the entire history of Western civilization.
The Parthenon was and still is the most glorious symbol of Athens' empire. Here was the spiritual heart of the city, the mark of her wealth, power, and artistic genius.
When you first came through the door, you'd have been just stunned. You'd have been confronted immediately by an enormous 40-foot high statue of Athena in gold and ivory and studded with jewels. I think the impression of a statue of that size and with that kind of dressing must have truly overwhelming.
Pericles had embellished his temple like no other. Though this astonishing statue has since been lost to history, other treasures from the Parthenon have survived for over 2,000 years. The most famous is the Parthenon frieze, a 500-foot-long stretch of carved marble which ran around the inner wall of the temple. The Parthenon frieze is only 2.5 inches thick at its maximum depth, and yet in this space the sculptors carved rank upon rank of crowded figures, a great procession of Athenians, glorious and elegant. Here Pericles offered his fellow citizens a vision of themselves and their democratic state at the height of their glory.
And I'd like you to do with this what we were doing with the earlier gallery, art gallery viewing, is just to let the images wash over you. You don't try to necessarily read all of the curatorial blurbs and all of that. And try to get a sense of the themes and the symbols that are embedded in the art objects that were important to the Greeks. Themes of the Olympics, things from everyday life, earrings, combs, whatever they used in everyday life. But also things that have embedded within them more significant things, the linkage between humanity and divinity. It gives you a sense of their industrial development, their use of metalwork, and their concept, their aesthetic concept of how to create objects and art pieces. Notice that a lot of these are in the form of ceramic pottery, both orange and black figure pottery. Interestingly enough, prior to the Greek Golden Age, the time of enlightenment, the figures are dark figures, black figure pottery primarily. But exactly at the time of the onset of the Greek Golden Age, the Greek time of enlightenment, the figures are enlightened, they become orange. But these are the things that people held in their hands in daily life. So we're no longer viewing them at a great distance, something that happened a long time ago that we study in history classes that has no relevance to us. Their concerns, their interests in the afterlife, their conception of God, their construction of the material world around them, the world of artifacts that surrounded them, that supported daily life, very similar to what we do today.
Την
speaking of the transience of life. And we've already mentioned a little bit about the Greek heroic code, but I'd like to kind of review that and flesh that out a little bit in preparation for our look at Schliemann's Troy and the story surrounding his excavations and the whole question of whether or not he had actually found Troy at all. It's been ongoing until about 10 years ago. So once again, we said the Greek heroic code, along with the focus on the relationship between humanity and divinity that brought the Trojan War about, are really the driving, underlying main points of this presentation, because they not only provide structure for the evolution of Greek cultural consciousness, but it's also ongoing in the present, as we mentioned earlier. So, in Homer's Iliad, the heroic code is the guarantee that certain human actions will result in glory. And they're not subject to the whim of the gods who operate in the universe. We'll see when we look at the Odyssey, when Circe offers Odysseus immortality. You can live with me in Mount Olympus forever. You'll be my husband. I've waited so long. I've been alone for 1,000 years on this island. You must come with me. And Odysseus says, in perfect alignment with the heroic code, no. I wouldn't want to be immortal, to grow bored and to live as you've lived. I'm proud to be human. I have a beginning and an end. I'm born, I die. I achieve greatness in my lifetime. I wouldn't trade that for anything. You know, it's the humans standing up to that and you know, declaring the sovereignty of the human race. And so Odysseus is the embodiment of that. So are a few other people like Achilles. Odysseus sums up the heroic code in his willingness to die. His willingness to sacrifice himself for the evolution of his God, country, family. That is the essence of being human. And in fact, as we said earlier, the origin of the humanistic tradition in Western civilization, the idea of individuality and achievement and being focused in this world, hopefully with the help of the gods, but either way, the sovereignty and self-determination of the human race is fundamental to our existence. And so the significance of it here, I'll underline this. Origin of the humanistic tradition in Western civilization. You can see we talk about the power of ideas. This is an idea that has lasted millennia and has shaped the consciousness of Western civilization.
Was discovered in Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. Many archaeologists believe that this was once the site of the ancient city of Troy. In the 11th century BC, the mighty heroes and Greek gods fought in a decade-long battle called the Trojan War. This bloody war symbolized the age of the heroes, or so said the Greek poet Homer, whose book the Iliad recounted the long and bloody conflict. In approximately 1200 BC, a Trojan prince named Paris visited Greece. There he met Helen, said to be the most beautiful woman in the world, and the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Paris then eloped with Helen, sweeping her off to Troy, but King Menelaus wanted her back. Thus began the long and infamous Trojan War. Homer said it took 10 years and over 1,000 Greek ships to defeat Troy. Finally, the clever ruse of the Trojan horse enabled the Greeks to sack the city. But were the heroes of the Trojan War, such as Nestor, Ajax, and Achilles, real historical figures, or was the story merely inspired fiction? Historians debated whether the Trojan War occurred at all. Yet one amateur archaeologist devoted his life to try to prove the story true. His name was Heinrich Schliemann, a self-made millionaire who in 1875 excavated a site he presumed to be Troy. There he found palace walls and gilded tombs of Bronze Age kings. He felt sure that they were the remains of the mighty city Homer had written about.
I believe there probably was a Trojan War. There's a great deal of evidence that the city of Troy was sacked numerous times. In fact, it's staggering how many times that city was sacked and destroyed by presumably invading armies and fires over a period of centuries. And to which strata of Troy Homer's Iliad pertains, I don't think anyone can ever know.
The answer to these questions may be buried under massive ruins discovered in Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. Many archaeologists believe that this was once the site of the ancient city of Troy. In the 11th century BC,
Since this DVD was made, much more information has come out about whether or not this was actually Troy. And one of the things that has come out, a group of Turkish and Greek archaeologists had been collecting artifacts from the Troy area, which is on the west coast of Turkey, halfway in between Izmir and Istanbul. They had been collecting artifacts and storing them in warehouses, but never actually looking at them because they were written in an ancient Anatolian language that nobody really knew how to translate. Till finally, somebody decided that they were going to try to figure this out. They went to warehouses, to these cuneiform-like tablets, and took them out. Finally, after a couple of years, finally got some facility in translation of this stuff. They discovered that one of the sets of tablets was a correspondence between King Priam and the last king of Hittite king out in the area of what is now Ankara, in the middle of the country, in which King Priam is complaining to the last Hittite king that he's afraid of the impending Greek aggression. He knows that they want to take economic control of the Aegean. They've been threatening to invade for a long time. He knows that that's King Agamemnon's motive, and they're just waiting for the attack, and he wants to know if the Hittite king can help. Bring some troops out there and kind of bolster the walls, and, create some resistance. In addition to most of the other forces in Anatolia went to defend Troy. The Hittite king said, no, I'm already under siege, I'm in the middle of a civil war, got a war on both sides. Shortly after that, the Hittite kingdom fell, and the king was killed, and actually he was conquered by a people that we now believe to be the Kurds and the Armenians. If you look at ancient maps of Anatolia, there are these little concentrations of the Urartians, who are the ancient Kurds, and the Armenians, Armenji, who are still in that area, who were opposing the Hittite king. Well, as it turns out, the Kurds and the Armenians are still in the area, and the Kurds are still trying to overthrow the ruling power in Anatolia, which is now Turkey. Also, the other questions about the authenticity of Schliemann's find. I actually went to the Troy site, the Troy ruins, which are still there in 9 layers. They're not discrete layers, one under the other, but some are jutting out depending on the size of the architectural structure. And I remembered, I was walking around in the Trojan ruins, hardly anyone there. This is like the peak of tourist season, it's Turkey. They don't really promote this kind of stuff, but they preserve the ruins. I'm walking around in the Trojan ruins, and I come to this little black curatorial blurb on the ground that says, Skyan Gate. And they said, well, wait a minute, Scaean Gate. In the 9th book of the Iliad, isn't that where Homer said that the Trojan royal family stood to watch the infamous battle between Achilles and Hector? Can this be the very same thing? Because he said, you know, the Trojan royal family stood looking out toward the Aegean, and on the banks of the Scamander River, that's where the battle of Achilles and Hector took place. So I went over, and I stood on the gate facing southwest, looking out toward the Aegean Sea. And the Scamander River is still there, bisecting the Trojan battle plain. And I had this electric moment of realization that I was standing in the place where King Priam, Helen, Paris, Andromache, Hector's wife, and Astyanax, his son, were standing watching the battle between Achilles and Hector, about maybe 200 or 300 yards out on the bank. It's all still there. Of course, Homer was blind, so he probably couldn't have seen that, but he said at the time he was living on the island of Samos, just off the coast of present-day Turkey, Anatolia, and he probably sent correspondents there, you know, to be his eyes and describe what they saw. So we have there are just a lot of historical correlations here, in addition to the fact that when I was there, I remember looking out on the horizons and seeing these huge mounds off in the distance out on the Aegean coast and wondering what those were. Turns out the same group of Greek and Turkish archaeologists went and excavated those. Nobody had touched those for 3,000 years. Now, if those existed in America, everybody would have been out there with shovels. It would be wall-to-wall restaurants and, you know, hotels or something. But they went out, they dug that up. Turns out they're the Greek burial mounds. They had battle armament from about the 1200 BC era.
Wow.
Sword marks on the skeletons.
Wow.
So they were able to establish that those were the Greek war dead from the Trojan War. They also went in and excavated. I mean, people had thought for a long time that the 7th layer had something in it. It was around 1200 BC. They excavated most of that and discovered that the foundations were charred as a result of a very intense fire.
Wow.
And they found some of the same remains that they found in the mounds on the 7th layer, the sword marks and battle gear. So all of that circumstantial evidence put together finally convinced probably even the people who did this DVD that the Trojan War actually happened, and it happened in that place at that time Schliemann said it did. And so we have some proof of that. This is a transitional piece by Hector Berlioz from his opera Les Troyens, the Trojans, and this is the choir of the Trojan people celebrating the greatness of Troy. This is 19th century French composer Hector Berlioz. And on this screen, Iliad-related art. The author, main characters, and events. Achilles, the only vulnerable part of him, the heel, where he was dipped in the river. The arrow of Achilles, Achilles' heel. dipping of Achilles into the river, the vulnerable point on his heel. Patroclus and Achilles, Patroclus, his cousin. The confrontation between King Agamemnon and Achilles. The death of Patroclus at the hands of Hector. The mourning of Achilles at the death of his cousin. It was Patroclus who put on Achilles' armor and ran into battle before he was ready to be a soldier. Hector thought it was Achilles. King Aeneas and his father Anchises fleeing Troy, heading down the west coast of what is now Turkey, and going off to form the basis of the Roman Empire, along with 50 Greek city-states and the Etruscans who were already there. In the film Troy, it's Paris who gives the sword of Troy to General Aeneas and tells him to go and build a new place for the Trojan Empire. It becomes the Roman Empire. Current day site of Troy, and the Mask of Agamemnon, the Greek king who was responsible for the Greek aggression against Troy. As it turns out, King Agamemnon's victory results in his own defeat, because he sacrificed his daughter, Iphigenia, on the island of Alos, to get fair winds and victory at Troy. And his wife, Clytemnestra, took issue with that. When he returned home from battle, vented her wrath. The history of Anatolia, current-day Turkey, is deep. It runs back to settlements which were discovered that existed at least 12,000 years ago at Göbekli Tepe. Now, apparently, the current estimated site of the Garden of Eden. And I think I told Don that my intention on the 27th night of Ramadan, the night of great power when Muhammad received the Quran from the archangels, was to go out there and go to the center of that location of the Garden of Eden and meditate all night to just see what's in the subtle consciousness there. As it turns out, the level of political activity and ISIS encroaching in southeast, coming across the Syrian border, is significant to the point where the U.S. State Department won't allow any Americans in the area. So for the second year, but that's still coming in the future. And as soon as that ban is lifted, I intend to do that, just to see what the energy is like out there. But I wanted to point out that Anatolia, current-day Turkey, resonates and in fact was part of the Athenian Empire. So everything that we see here that applies to what we normally think of Greece applies to what we now think of as Turkey. There were a lot of Greek citizens living in Anatolia. They had settlements there, agricultural developments, commercial environments. The city I currently live in Turkey is a major Eastern Mediterranean commercial shipping site that goes back to the Greeks. And in fact, the jetties that separate the in and out parts of the harbor are Roman in origin. They built them. If you walk around, you find distance markers. Half of it's in Greek, and then when the Romans came along, same distance, they tell you how far it is to Tarsus, how far it is to Adana, how far it is to Baghdad. You know, they're all over the place. I was sitting in a restaurant having lunch at the Shalale restaurant, which is reputed to be the place of Mark Antony and Cleopatra's tryst. And there was this large cement caisson sitting next to me, next to the table I was eating at. And I was looking at it while I was eating and noticing that, you know, it was Latin, and I have some background in Latin, so I could read one side of it, the other side I couldn't. And so I called the waiter over. I said, what are these things? Where do they come from? He said, oh, those are old Athenian Empire distance markers. They're all over the place here along the coast. Oh, okay. But it's an example of an experience I have all the time there. You're just sitting in a situation and you suddenly realize that you're in the middle of an ancient cultural site. And the Turkish government doesn't really disturb those. The Turks don't really put a lot of value in historical study. So it's everywhere. You get out of your car, you walk into a field, you're on the grounds of an ancient Roman governor's villa. And a friend who bought some property there and started excavating to build a foundation came across all of these Roman-era ceramics, statuary, called the Turkish government. They sent people out there and said, "Oh, that's Roman. This was the site of a Roman governor's villa 2,000 years ago. That's just what's left over from that." And he said, "Well, you know, so can I use it? Can I set it up?" Right? No, just cover it up. It's ancient property. Just cover it up and forget about it. I mean, that's their attitude toward the study of ancient history, when in fact they live now in a site that is, it really goes beyond. I mean, that area, Anatolia, has been a passageway from Asia to Europe since the end of the last ice age. And as soon as the ice mass moved above that, people started migrating. The first Homo sapiens migration from northeastern Africa came up through Anatolia, and they lived in the cave structures that are all on the coast area now. But that was what? What, 100,000 years ago, the first migration. So the historical framework that we're working with here in Anatolia goes much beyond most of what we consider to be ancient history. It's much more ancient than ancient history. But what I wanted to point out is that the current day culture in Turkey is very, from that standpoint, very diversified. And a lot of the dances and music that have collected on the Anatolian, we might call it a peninsula, almost the Anatolian landmass, are still there and are still cultivated. And most of the people that I've encountered in Turkey, they know the music and dance traditions all over the country. Some of them are definitively Turkic in origin, but some of them are not. Some of them are much older than that. And in fact, the Turkish dance company Anadolu Ateşi, which translates as the Fire of Anatolia, it's a spectacular dance company that studies the history of the music and dance traditions of Anatolia, both pre-Turkic and Turkic. And I wanted to show you some of that to give you a sense of what's going on in the middle of all this Greekness that we're studying. There are also a lot of other things going on. Some of it Greek, and some of it coming from all of the other tribes that lived in Anatolia before the Turks got there. This is Anadolu Ateşi performing at the theater in Aspendos in northern Antalya. Hittite architecture in the background. Listen to the rhythms and the sound and the instruments. People still play this and dance to it. This is an ancient musical instrument called the zurna, originally used in large groups at war and military functions to stimulate the adrenaline, to quicken the blood, to ready the soldier for battle. Dressed in traditional Anatolian dress and face ornamentation. The symbol of the Anatolian fire, the symbol of Anatolian consciousness, the source of the individual soul, the light of God. Hittite gods looking down from above. And now, I'd like to ask you to do some dancing. What you just saw the group doing is an ancient form of Anatolian dance, eventually edited into the Turkish tradition, called halay, H-A-L-A-Y, which is traditionally done now in Turkish weddings. I went to a wedding on the Anatolian coast under a full moon with 300 or 400 Turkish people, heavy percussion in the background, linked with our fingers. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, concentric circles of this halay movement. Back and forth movement of concentric circles moving back and forth, ululating at the top of their lungs. I can't do that, but that's that high-pitched. The Arabs do that too. When you get 300 or 400 people doing that with heavy-duty rhythms dancing, you can get a sense of the picture, the mental picture of that, and why that's so powerful. The energy that comes from that is extraordinary. So I'd like to invite you back to the dance area, the dance floor back here.
Can I ask a question first? What is the name of that music that you first played that was great?
Please hold comments and questions until the end. Come on out. Yeah. This is an easy step. There's nothing complicated about it. Come on out. Form a circle. Form a large circle. Connected with our little fingers. Ready? 2, 3, step. 1, 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 2, 3, step. Just a double time. We can keep it at single time. Hey! Okay, recover from that for a minute. It's a little aerobic. Feel like I'm back in Turkey. There we go. God, you must be a dancer.
The uvulating you reminds me of Native American.
Yeah.
Tremolo.
Actually, that's a good point, because the Turks are related to the Native Americans. They all come from Western Mongolia. The only difference is that the Turks and Azerbaijani went west. 14 and 23,000 years ago, the North American and the Amerindians of the south went over the Bering Land Strait into North and South America. So they are related.
Yeah. Usually it's the ladies who do that dancing.
That?
Native American, yeah.
Yeah, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. Okay, that gets your blood flowing a little bit. This is an ancient Anatolian song. It comes from the earlier Roman Empire, so it's actually a little after the Greek influence. But I thought I'd include it just to give you a sense of what early Greek Turkic language sounds like, in some sense of the folk music that is all over Anatolia. I probably collected about 5,000 examples of it. But it's been ongoing for several hundred years, plus everything they brought from Western Mongolia with them. But here's an example of it. This is entitled Yarım Gitti Çeşme'ye, which is the story of a young woman who gives her love to a young man, and it isn't returned as fervently as she would wish. So there's some sense of sadness about it. But there's also a sense of joy, and that she feels that, she experiences the love for another person, and even if she doesn't get it back, she enjoys the experience. Yarım gitti. The first line the males sing, the second line the ladies sing. Ready? Yarım gitti çeşmeye, yarım gitti çeşmeye, yarım güne öğlen, yarım gitti çeşmeye, güzel öğlen, yarım öğlen çeşmeye, yar yarıman, çeşmeye, yarız yarıman, ne istersin verelim, aman güzel öğlen, ama istersin verelim. Aman güzel öğlen elim su içmeye, yar aman. Guys, su içmeye, yar aman. Basically Hawaii rhythms. Here we go, verse 2. Aman güzel öğlen, aman güzel öğlen, bugünüm yar aman, bugünüm sevişine, yar aman, deli olacağım yar, aman güzel öğlen, deli olacağım yar, aman güzel öğlen. Ben de şu, yar aman, ben düşünme, yar aman. Everybody together. Kızın göreyim, aman güzel oğlan, bir canım vereyim, yar yar yarıman, canımdır vereyim, yar yar yarıman, saçlarımın telinden, aman güzel oğlan, saçlarımın telinden, aman güzel oğlan, başına taç olayım, yar yar yarıman, başına taç olayım, yar yar yarıman. Very good for a group of non-Turkish speaking people. We get the idea. That type of folk song has been all over Anatolia from Greek and Roman times, and up into the present and integrated into the Turkic traditions. You get this interesting blend all over Anatolia, all kinds of variations of that, and the dances that go with them. My lover has gone to the fountain. My lover's gone to the fountain, nice boy, to dig up my wounds. I give whatever you want, nice boy, to drink water from your hand. I am in love with my lover's smile, and his love the way he is. I will be crazy because I think too much.
So which is that line?
Which one is that?
Yeah, which one is that?
Yada 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 man is I give whatever you want, nice boy. I want to see your face. I would give my life for that. From my hair, I knit a crown on your head.
Well, where is that one? I think because I think too much.
That's the last line of the last stanza, which would be Ben düşüne düşüne. Ben düşüne düşüne. But one of the traditions in that tradition, and I know Kurdish women do this, is they will take their hair and braid something from it and give it to their beloved. Okay, so there's a lot we could do with that. That could be a year-long study in itself. But it gives you a taste of what's there in the cultural consciousness still from ancient times, kind of all mixed in. And it isn't until you start looking more deeply into it to get a sense of its roots, you start understanding how ancient the audible culture is around you, in addition to the visual culture, the architecture. We have a music and dance tradition. Some of it is cross-fertilized because Greece eventually became part of the Ottoman Empire. Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, Macedonia, they're all absorbed into that, so there's constant cross-fertilization going on there. In fact, I went to the Ottoman Museum in Athens, which is, if you get a chance to go there, a very interesting place, because it shows all the areas in which Greek and Turkish culture mixed. I'd like to shift now to the other work of Homer that we're interested in today, called the Odyssey, which is an extension of the story of Troy. But it is also, as we mentioned earlier, a study of Greek philosophy and the way Odysseus sees the world. Since we're of course limited on time, I'd like to take a brief look, as we've done, at the artworks and get an overview of the visual imagery so you can connect to that and get a sense of cultural context from that for the drama that we're about to study. But we're going to focus primarily on Odysseus' return. Remember, when Odysseus, the person who thought of the Trojan horse, and he was there for the fall of Troy, remember, he wasn't very popular with Apollo and Neptune because they're the ones who helped build the city of Troy. And as a result of that, they made his return home to Ithaca very difficult. He first encounters the Cyclops, and then he encounters the Sirens who try to draw his ships up in the rocks. And then he goes to the island of Circe, and she tries to hold him there, but realizes there's no point in doing this because he's just, he's just too human, I guess. He wants to go home. And of course, as we said earlier, Odysseus' declaration of the sovereignty of humanity by telling Circe that when made the offer of immortality to become a god, he says, no thank you. I'm happy being human. And I will live out my life, and I will achieve what I'm here to achieve, and when it comes time for me to go, I'll go knowing that I made a difference in this life. Nobody can change that. And so, but then after he leaves Circe, his memory is still kind of foggy because of her influence. But he finally gets back to Ithaca, only to discover that his palace is full of suitors. All the noblemen in Ithaca are trying to marry his wife Penelope, trying to push his son Telemachus out of the way, and go home, little boy, you don't belong here. So what we're going to do is look at that a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you to do a scene study. I'm going to ask each of you to step into the role of Penelope. One of you will be Odysseus. Some of you will be the suitors who scoff at him when he arrives at his palace in the clothing of a beggar. And to kind of just play around with that a little bit, using the Stanislavski technique of bringing your own emotion and experience to the character. At first sight, you might say, well, I'm not an actor. How am I going to do that? But Stanislavski would have said, you have everything you need to be an actor within you by nature of your emotions and personal experience. Maybe you were never Odysseus in a past lifetime, and maybe you never participated in activities on the scale that he did, but you have experienced anger, joy, love for his wife Penelope. Because when he first goes back there, he doesn't know if she's still going to be there. He left there 15 years ago. 10 years of the Trojan War, 5 years of being wafted all over the Mediterranean by the gods punishing him for destroying Troy. He doesn't know where she's at. And he comes back as in the clothing of a beggar just to see, is she still my wife? Does she still love me? And what's going on there? And in the process, he confronts this situation and discovers what he will discover. This is against the background contemporary piece called The Winds of Ithaca. Images wash over you, absorb the consciousness of the time, the faces, the people, the themes, and the symbols. Odysseus confronting the suitors. Odysseus, author of the Trojan Horse. Odysseus, great general of the Trojan War, and his wife Penelope, in a pensive, mourning mood, because just as he doesn't know what she's been doing for the last 15 years, she doesn't even know if he's alive. Here we meet Penelope, played by an Italian actress named Silvana Mangano. This is the 1954 version of the film.
But for us, no, we do not live on memories. Be silent. Have you no respect for her grief?
If it were at least grief for one who is really dead, it might soon come to an end, as it should.
Then you would be able to choose one of us.
No one knows the fate of Ulysses. No one speak of him as dead, who has not seen his body on a funeral pyre.
You see, Penelope, even a storyteller's fantasies trouble you. Inside you there is still much doubt.
Come in noi la certezza. Dov'è Ulisse? In quale terra lo tengono prigioniero? Tu avevi promesso che...
Some of this is interestingly enough in Italian.
Che la fosse terminata. You've been working too long on this terror which you started years ago, and which never ends, right?
Ulysses what prevents me finishing it. It's my sorrow, tears, they cloud my eyes, and so my hands work slower.
If you would only favor one of us with your smile.
There is not one among you to compare with my father.
Are we not men too? Have we not also strength and courage and noble hearts? You have certainly one thing, insatiable appetites. You have taken advantage of the weakness of a woman and her young son to invade the house of Ulysses and squander his wealth and his flocks. You have even dared to force from the queen her promise to marry one of you.
By what right do you judge us?
Also,
He speaks the truth. You have invaded my house. You have destroyed my peace here. You have extracted from me a promise I did not
no, it is more than a promise. It is the destiny of Ithaca, which has been too long without a king. He is right.
Not one of you is worthy of the crown.
And so we continue to have a king made of mist, a shadow. The people too are growing weary, Penelope.
The feelings of my people are no concern of yours. You are all strangers on this island. I am still the queen here. And the people of Ithaca love their queen, sympathize with her sorrow, respect i suoi ricordi.
Sei troppo crudele con la tua bellezza, Penelope. You're much too young to sleep only with your memories.
I say Ulysses lives, and he will return. And when he does, you will all regret having dared to offend me.
Okay? So that gives you the emotional context of what we're about to do in the form of a scene study.
In a footnote for what?
So think of the essential emotion here. And if you haven't been in this situation, which most of us probably haven't, you'll have to go to personal experience. A situation in which something you weren't treated well, your intentions weren't honored, you were believed, somebody said something you didn't like, that whatever it was, there was some anger and resentment, some feeling that, that somehow justice will be done. And hopefully that doesn't happen to you often in life, but in this case, in your role as an actor, in this scene from Odysseus, the final scene, one of the scenes from Odysseus, we'll ask you to cultivate that a little bit, and one of you will be Odysseus, who will eventually show up in the form of a clothing of a beggar. And some of you will be the banquet goers, who are the proud noblemen, who are calling on Penelope to, relinquish her loyalty to her husband because her husband obviously isn't coming back. We don't even know if he's alive. The people want a new ruler. You're standing in the way. All the constant pressure, all the time partying in the palace and, having a good time. So what I'd like you to do for 1 minute of your time, is to close your eyes and to cultivate the emotions of this based on your own personal experience. It's what Stanislavski would ask his actors to do before a rehearsal. And just locate a situation in which you feel you were treated unfairly. No one would listen to you. And just bring that into your awareness before we even attempt to encounter the dialogue. Okay. So now that you've had a chance to contact those feelings, and if you were in an acting conservatory, you would do this exercise every day and over a period of years. You just get to the point where you can just slip into character, bring the emotions up and slip into character immediately. Okay, here we go. Let's have the read-in. Ready? Places, everyone. Quiet on the set. Action.
We are at a banquet at the royal palace in Odysseus' kingdom of Ithaca. A party is in progress. Penelope sings Britney Spears one more time.
How did that go?
Is that the song of a lonely woman?
I didn't think any of you could hear it. You are making so much noise.
Think of it as a conversation, not noise.
Excuse me if I want some peace and quiet in my own house.
We're your guests. We deserve better treatment.
Sit down and get serious.
Get serious? Oh, excuse me. We're in school. Everybody has to get serious.
Yes, teacher.
Don't mock me.
Don't you like to dance, Penelope?
Yes, of course I like to dance. But you are having a party in my house and none of you are invited.
Nonsense! We're all invited!
Be quiet and listen to the poet. He will tell us about the great deeds of Odysseus.
Odysseus? Didn't he used to be... Odysseus? Didn't he used to be the king of Ithaca?
Everybody's got a few flagons of wine under their belt. Everything is funny, you know.
Yeah.
He still is.
Odysseus built the Trojan horse and left it at the gates of Troy. The Trojans thought that it was a peace offering for the gods and pulled the horse into the city. They did not know that Odysseus and the Greeks were hiding inside the horse. While the Trojans celebrated, Odysseus and the Greeks came out of the horse and opened the city gates and let the Greek army into the city. They sacked and burned Troy. Odysseus had a great victory, but his pride was his mistake. He offended Neptune, the Trojan god of the sea. The Trojan prophet Cassandra condemned Odysseus.
So it's where's Cassandra? This is kind of an otherworldly thing, you know. It's like not really human. It's kind of like, Odysseus, you have made Neptune angry. Your pride caused you to challenge the gods. You will never know peace again. You will live your life alone, and you will die at the bottom of the sea. You know, it's that kind of otherworldly condemnation coming from a prophetess. Okay, here we go. Action.
Yeah.
Odysseus, you have made Neptune angry. Your pride caused you to challenge the gods. You will never know peace again. You will live your life alone, and you will die at the bottom of the sea.
Good.
There, you see, Penelope. Odysseus is gone.
And he is not coming back.
So, relax and join the party.
You have invaded my house. You drink my wine. You have stolen my freedom.
Aren't any of us worthy of your hand in marriage?
You are foolish and greedy to think you can come here and try to marry me.
The point is, Penelope, that greed is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, it captures the essence of life. Greed in all of its forms. Greed for life, for money, for love, and for knowledge has improved humanity. And greed will not only save us, it will save the kingdom of Ithaca from destruction.
This is like a celebration of greed. Who does this?
Ferengi.
Telemachus.
Leave my mother alone.
Go out and play, young man. This is a gathering of men.
You call yourself a man? You break into Penelope's house and try to destroy the memory of my father.
I am still the Queen of Ithaca, and I am still in control of my life.
Look, Penelope, I can see you're really upset about this. I honestly think you ought to sit down calmly, take a stress pill, and think things over. I know you have made some very poor decisions recently, but I can give you my complete assurance that Ithaca will be back to normal when this marriage situation is settled.
Am I supposed to feel better now?
We are all here to help you.
Right. You are all here to help yourself.
Odysseus is dead. Why don't you get on with your life?
I won't believe Odysseus is dead until I see his body on a funeral pyre.
We don't live on memories.
The people of Ithaca need a new king.
A new king! A new king! Me!
You insult me! When Odysseus returns, you will not be so brave.
You have destroyed our house. You drink our wine, and you have no respect for my mother, Penelope.
The people of Ithaca are tired of waiting.
We are tired. We are being ruled by a shadow, a dead man.
You are all strangers on this island. Only the gods know the sorrow which clouds my eyes.
Penelope, we are also noble, brave, and honorable men.
None of you compares with my father, Odysseus.
It is the destiny of Ithaca. We must have a new ruler, or our future is lost.
He is right.
The feelings of my people are none of your business.
You're much too young to sleep only with your memories.
Enjoy life while you can. Your days are numbered.
Oh well, we have a philosopher in the crowd.
Great wisdom from such a little boy.
I am as much a man as you are.
If his father had been wise, he might still be king.
I believe Odysseus is alive and that he will return. When he does, all of you will regret what you have done.
We have no regrets. We have done nothing wrong.
Get serious!
You have insulted your queen.
Come on, give us a break.
You invited yourselves.
Okay, maybe we shouldn't be here, but who's going to stop us? You? Telemachus, your husband Odysseus?
He's not here. He hasn't been for a long time. You live in a fantasy world.
I don't even know why I bother talking to you. It is a waste of breath.
It is even a greater waste of breath trying to get you to listen to us.
So, why don't you stop?
Because we all want to marry you.
Oh, please. I've heard it all before.
And you will hear it until you do something about it.
Aren't there any other women in Ithaca?
Of course, but not as beautiful as you.
Why don't you move into their house?
That's not very hospitable.
I can't stand to listen to you anymore.
Okay. We got some actors in here. Thank you. Very nicely read. That's fantastic. Okay, so that gives you some direct contact with the emotional content of an ancient work, which is another way to go about connecting with it. So, obviously, there's quite a bit more to this story, but we have the general outlines, the general main points, the underlying philosophical framework that the Greeks created for themselves in the ancient world, and that provides a vehicle for the evolution of Western civilization. We've touched on the audible aspect of ancient Greek culture by bringing authentic period music. End of the presentation, we looked at the major literary works of the ancient world that capture the historical events of the ancient world and the way the writers conceived of history at that time, plus the philosophical content of the Ovid's Metamorphosis, Virgil's Aeneid, Homer's Iliad, and the Odyssey, which are the vehicles of transmission to the Greek mythological tradition to the modern world. We also noted that the Greek heroic code is an organizational principle which, while it was formed over 2,500 years ago, now becomes the framework for the evolution of Western civilization into the modern age, through the emphasis on individuality and achievement. And we've also tried to look at the music and dance traditions to bring a motion aspect to this, to get a sense of how the creative intelligence of the time worked through those particular creative media. And the purpose of this presentation is to present that information in the context of a multimedia, multimodal, audiovisual, interactive format to prove a point. And in fact, that's part of this. I don't know how much more time we have to discuss this, but the title of this presentation is the use of multicultural, multimodal, multimedia as a context for learning. And that once the brain electrochemistry is lit up on a number of different levels, any information, in addition to the literature and language that we looked at, is more quickly learned and retained over a longer period of time. And my question in the title was, is this, given the fact that the main complaint in our academic tradition is that people don't remember things for very long. In fact, after 2 years of finishing a 4-year program, they lose 98% of it. Is this style of presentation, regardless of the content, whatever content you choose, is this a way to counterbalance that ongoing problem in every educational system on earth? Is this the basis for a theory of super learning? And on that note, on that point, I'll throw that open for discussion. On the basis of what you've seen here, and what you can remember of this, if I asked you to write an essay on this tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, do you think that you would remember, because of this confluence of multi-layered sensory, motor and sensory activity, firmly ingrained enough in the brain that you would remember it enough to write a coherent essay about this? We're open to opinions. Hold on just a second, I'll cut the soundtrack. An opinion. Is anyone?
Yeah, I think it's a very good approach, and also you're including story. Story is the backbone of learning from civilization's very beginning. That's what, it's a story of Odysseus. It's got something you can relate to, whereas I really care about science, but science is usually a story poorly told, the most dry, broken down story. You know, who's the character, where's the plot? Yet the people that created science, they had lives, they were human beings, they interacted, things happened. So I really applaud what you're doing with the music and the dance and having people take roles. But for me, that is all part, the dance also is part of the story. You know, and that's the most powerful conveyor right now. But you know, sometimes we need to do things beyond story, but story is so powerful and important.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you brought that out, because when I do things like that, I think of it in terms of story, because I write film scripts and stage plays. And for me, teaching, this is a stage, this is a theatrical environment. Teaching is no longer simply giving information. It's acting, and acting through story. So if I can take a lot of historical information and put it in the context of a story that has human impact and affects people's emotions and enables them to integrate their own personal experience, I'm basically doing on the level of a cultural history study what Konstantin Stanislavski encourages actors to do on the level of individual roles, is to bring their personal experience to the part and be part of that story. And once you cross into that, like Alice through the looking glass, once you step into that level of integration of knowledge and the use of higher brain electrochemistry, then the information tends to stay there. So it's at once a theory of cultural history teaching, the use of multimedia, but it's also a theory of learning. As you stated it eloquently through story.
I know this little wonderful thing, and it says, man cannot have God without telling stories. God cannot have man without creating stories. In this storytelling universe, I am only a comma.
Yeah, it's a good way of thinking of it.
I like the dance in it too, just because it gets people moving and there's like a more emotional content. So if we didn't have the dance, the drama wouldn't have been so lively.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And what I'm trying to create is to try, as far as we can, is to step into that world. You know, not studying something that's at a great distance, but to actually experience and see and hear what people experienced, saw, and heard.
As I started to mention to you yesterday in our brief discussion, I'm a very devoted disciple of A.S. Neal, the great educator who started Summerhill. And his major thesis was that children or adults do not learn effectively or significantly unless they're having fun and in a state of play. And I firmly believe that we learn nothing if we're overly serious. We only can learn when we're in a state of joy and play. And the other thing I want to say is that Meher Baba had said very, very definitely that the Garden of Eden is in Asia. And that easily could be Asia Minor, because he didn't define it beyond that. I've never found any quote beyond that, but he did say, what he meant by that, I don't know exactly, but he did say the Garden of Eden was in Asia. And there's one other question I had for you, and that is that there was a Turkic people that in the 7th century, they organized a religious debate between a Jewish rabbi, a Catholic priest, and a Muslim authority. It went on for a few days or weeks, and the king decided that the rabbi had won the debate, and the whole kingdom converted to Judaism. It's not a myth. There are references to in the Jewish Gemara and Mishnah, and there are some historical references. And the interesting thing about it is that these Turkic people were not the way Turks look, modern Turks, but they were many with red hair and blonde and with green eyes and blue eyes. And it's often been used, and it's believed strongly in the Jewish world, that explains Jewish people like Art Garfunkel, myself, Stephen Tischler. I with bright red hair, I have green eyes. Steve is similar to Art Garfunkel, blonde, natural blonde, blue eyes. Doesn't look at all Semitic, any of us. We look more Celtic. And have you come across that in your researches? I forget the name of the people, but it just slips my mind right now. But about this whole phenomena of this Turkic kingdom, that they didn't live in Turkey, they lived in the Caucasus. And they all intermarried after they converted to Judaism with the rest of us Jews. Have you heard about this?
There is some evidence to suggest that some of the Western Mongolians wandered into Central Asia. And the main body of them went into what's now Turkey and Azerbaijan. So something like that is possible, given the migration patterns of the Western Mongolians after leaving Western Mongolia, those who went west anyway. As far as any specific knowledge of what you're describing, I have none. But I would like to know more.
I noticed that 4 or 5, 6 times
we portrayed Helen of Troy as a redhead.
Yeah.
Was she a redhead, or is that?
That's been debated because, people from that area of the world are notoriously not blonde or redheaded. They're usually black-haired, dark-haired. All Turks are dark-haired, not all of them.
A couple more questions, if you don't mind. I'm getting my Ulysses or Odysseus confused a little bit with Aeneid. But Polyphemus was the Cyclops, right?
Yeah.
Now, if the Strait of Messina, between Messina and Calabria in Italy, that was Scylla and Charybdis, right? Well, what were Scylla and Charybdis?
Well, they were like the whirlpools.
One was Scylla, one was Charybdis.
Charybdis is the whirlpool, and Scylla is the
monster with many heads that used to rip the men off the ships.
Well, yeah, a Medusa-like character that haunted sailors when they came through the straits.
But Polyphemus was not in that area, was he?
No.
Okay. Okay, that was Scylla and Charybdis there. How about the Sirens? That was Aeneid. But that was Ulysses also.
Yeah.
That had himself tied so he could listen to the music of the Sirens and not go insane.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Was the dancing also similar to Jewish Israeli dancing? So like when the Orthodox Jews do the Hora and dance in a circle, is there a connection between the Turk? I know there was a big Jewish community in Turkey, and the Ottomans relatively treated Jews pretty fair, according relative to other cultures. Is there a link between, if I see like the Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews dance in this circle, and is there any connection, or you just?
I think there's a certain amount of overlap there. Okay. If you look at Middle Eastern culture in general, they have a strong dance tradition. There's a lot of diversity, and there always has been in Anatolia, including the Jews. And those traditions, it's like they're not totally walled-off groups. They make friends, they have commercial connections, they interact socially. One person invites someone to another party, they go to whatever, So the traditions are spread in that way. They might not fully realize that at the moment, like, oh, well, I've been invited to this other group's tradition. I am a recipient of this new tradition, and now the standard bearer of it in my particular society. Nothing that, concrete. But gradually, you get a large group of diversified people living together, sharing their traditions, commercial base, exchanging goods and artifacts and services. Eventually, the traditions become shared.
Yeah, well, I know like Turkish is really Europe. People think of Europe as Caucasian, but Turkey and even Greece, sometimes it's like the Middle East, in that part of Europe, even Italian, people don't really talk about it, but they would think Italy or Sicily, Turkey, I'm going to stick to Turkey, are more Caucasian and Europe, but not, if you look at some of the dancing and some of the, do Turks consider themselves, I guess it depends, more European aligned or Middle East?
They're an interesting mix. They're like a balancing point because there's been so much influence traveling both ways. And they were, before the Ottoman Empire, Anatolia was part of the Islamic Empire with the Baghdad and Cordoba, Spain, as the two poles. And the caravanserai, the buildings that were established along those routes about 40 kilometers apart, is about as long as a camel can walk in one day, became centers of cultural exchange because people they were bringing artifacts and ideas from the east, people were bringing things back from Spain, coming in from the north, the Silk Road, a lot of exchange and combination of cultural traditions. So Anatolia, even though now it's governed by the Turks, you look under the surface, I see it in my classes, there are just a lot of people. I had people in my first year class who had the name of Hittite tribes. So the Hittites are still around, the Kurds are there, the Armenians are still there, the Turks are there, both Seljuk and Ottoman Turks. Seljuks came in the 11th century, the Rumi was part of. Persians, the Greeks are still there. There are Italian people who come from Italy to go to school in this school. And so you've got sitting in my classroom, once I realized what I was dealing with, I was basically dealing with the visible cultural history of Anatolia.
Yeah, I don't think you see a lot of Turks in the United States. I see a lot of Greek Americans. I grew up in New York. A lot of Greeks, Italian, but very few did I meet. There are a few Turkish kids in my high school, and I don't think the population, maybe I'm wrong, was a big emigration from Turkey. Turkish Americans, were they mostly in the big New York, Chicago? Is there?
Yeah,
Right,
it's,
correct? Yeah.
that's probably more recent because of the interest, especially the Turkish kids who are under 30, who are kind of looking over the fence, and they want more of a taste. Some of them have been to Europe or gone to school in Europe, maybe prep school or something. Once they get a taste of it, they want to go to school there. In fact, I just helped one of my students, who's a Turkish girl from Adana, to get into Columbia University. Because she felt like, even though Turkey is a secular Muslim society, there's still a lot of oppression of women, not as much as in Arabic societies. But she wrote this passionate essay to the admissions committee about, I have this desire to develop myself, but I can't do that here.
Wow.
The women are suppressed, and I want you to hear that, and they did.
Cool. I have a pamphlet at home that talks about the heads of different religions, and in it says that the Greeks believed that Zoroaster existed 5,000 years before the Trojan War. And that's the only reference I've ever came across that puts Zoroaster at 6,000 BC, where Meir Baba puts him at. Some places as early as 1,700 BC. Have you ever come across anything like that?
It's the further back you go, there's a lack of standardized scholarship, the harder it gets to figure out when people did what. Because they're talked about, like even in our Middle Ages, they use the Latin term "ferebat olim." It happened in the past, at some point in the past. They don't bother to say 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So we don't really know if the people that seem to be people are the accumulation of attrition finally personified by someone. Someone said that about the Buddha, to the consternation of Buddha followers, that there was no actual person such as the Buddha, that it was simply a compilation of teachings that eventually they started attributing to a person called the Buddha. And so obviously that caused a ripple in the Buddhist community. But the problem is that the further back, we hardly have anything left of the Iliad, just shards of the Iliad. And that was 8th century BC. So anything beyond that, it's really hard to verify exactly what happened.
It just said the Greeks believed. It didn't really give any sources. And I know that there was another Zoroaster around 700 BC that they might confuse with the Zoroaster that we know started the Zoroastrian religion.
Yeah.
And then also, I think in those days, if you wrote something and you weren't well known, you would go under the name of somebody who was well established. So your writings would get read.
Yeah, you could say anything. There's no standardization of scholarship or refereed journals back then, so that your opinions are balanced with what is known to exist. So, yeah, I don't know. Beyond a certain point, it's hard to pin down exactly who said what when.